Marcus Thompson was adjusting his tie in the bathroom mirror of his downtown office building when the first scream echoed through the ventilation system. As a senior accountant at Brennan and Associates, he'd grown accustomed to the usual office drama, but this sound was different, raw, primal, and filled with terror that made his blood run cold. He paused, listening intently as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. At 42, Marcus had always been the practical one, the guy who kept emergency supplies in his desk drawer and never forgot to check his car's oil level. These habits, which his ex-wife Sarah had mockingly called paranoid, would soon prove to be the difference between life and death. The building's intercom crackled to life, but instead of the usual announcements about maintenance or meetings, there was only static punctuated by what sounded like growling. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized the voice of Rebecca, the cheerful receptionist, calling for help before the transmission cut to an ominous silence. He quickly splashed cold water on his face, trying to process what was happening. Outside the small bathroom window, he could see the street below, where people were running in panic, abandoning their cars in the middle of the road. Some figures moved differently than others, with jerky, unnatural movements that sent chills down his spine. Marcus pressed his ear against the bathroom door, hearing shuffling footsteps in the hallway beyond, accompanied by strange moaning sounds that seemed to come from multiple directions. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, but there was no signal. The building's backup generator kicked in, indicating that the main power had failed, and the emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow under the door. He knew he had to move, but every instinct screamed at him to stay hidden. Taking a deep breath, Marcus slowly opened the door and peered into the hallway. The scene before him was like something from a nightmare. His colleague Janet from Human Resources was stumbling toward him, her business suit torn and stained with dark liquid. Her usually neat hair hung in matted strands, and her eyes had a milky, vacant quality that made Marcus's skin crawl. When she noticed him, she let out a guttural sound and began moving faster, her movements becoming more aggressive. Marcus slammed the door shut and locked it, his heart pounding as Janet began clawing at the door with increasing intensity. Through the small window, Marcus could see that chaos had erupted across the entire city. Smoke billowed from several buildings, and the distant sound of sirens mixed with screaming created a symphony of horror. Cars were overturned, and groups of people were fleeing from others who moved with that same disturbing gait he'd noticed in Janet. It was then that Marcus realized the unthinkable truth. The dead were somehow walking among the living and they were hunting. His mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. The building had 8 floors and his office was on the 6th. The stairwells would likely be compromised, but staying in the bathroom wasn't an option. Marcus remembered the emergency kit he kept in his desk drawer, a flashlight, some protein bars, a first aid kit, and most importantly, a multi-tool with a knife. He also recalled the building's layout, including the service elevator that led to the parking garage and the maintenance tunnels that connected to the neighboring buildings. As the sounds outside the bathroom grew more intense, with more of those creatures seemingly drawn to the noise, Marcus made his decision. He would have to fight his way to his office, grab his supplies, and then find a way out of the building. The thought of facing Janet and potentially other infected colleagues made him nauseous, but he knew that staying put meant certain death. He removed his tie and wrapped it around his knuckles, picked up the ceramic tank lid from the toilet as a makeshift weapon, and prepared himself for what he knew would be the most terrifying journey of his life. The irony wasn't lost on him that all those years of Sarah calling him overly cautious had actually prepared him for this moment. His emergency planning, situational awareness, and practical nature were about to be put to the ultimate test. As Marcus steadied himself at the door, listening to the chaos beyond, he whispered a prayer and reminded himself that survival would require not just courage, but smart thinking and careful planning. The old world had ended in a matter of hours, and now he would have to navigate a reality where the dead walked among the living, and every decision could mean the difference between seeing another sunrise or joining the ranks of the undead. Marcus steadied himself behind the bathroom door, listening to the horrific sounds of Janet clawing at the wood with what seemed like inhuman persistence. Her fingernails scraped against the surface in a rhythmic pattern that made his teeth ache, but more disturbing was the complete absence of any recognizable human communication. No pleas for help, no words of confusion, just animalistic growling that grew more intense with each passing minute. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The ceramic toilet tank lid felt heavier than expected in his trembling hands, but it was better than facing the infected empty-handed. Taking a deep breath, Marcus yanked the door open and swung the makeshift weapon with all his strength. The porcelain connected with Janet's temple with a sickening crack, sending her stumbling backward into the hallway wall. Dark fluid oozed from the wound, but she immediately began to rise again, her movements becoming more erratic and aggressive. Marcus didn't wait to see if she would recover fully. He sprinted toward his office, dodging around overturned furniture and scattered papers that littered the corridor. The sixth floor had transformed into a war zone. Emergency lighting cast everything in an ominous red glow, and the usual hum of office equipment had been replaced by an eerie silence broken only by distant moaning and the sound of his own labored breathing. Marcus reached his cubicle and frantically pulled open his desk drawer, grabbing his emergency kit and stuffing the contents into his briefcase. The flashlight, protein bars, first aid supplies, and multi-tool disappeared into the bag along with his wallet and car keys. As he turned to leave, a voice called out from the supply closet near the elevator bank. "Please, is someone there? Help me." The voice was female, accented, and filled with terror. Marcus approached cautiously, his makeshift weapon raised, and found Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the medical clinic on the third floor crouched behind boxes of copy paper. Her white coat was torn and stained, her dark hair disheveled, but her eyes were clear and alert, definitely not infected. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez," she whispered urgently. "I was treating someone when this started. The man I was examining, he just changed, became violent, tried to bite me. I've been hiding here for hours." She gestured toward the barricaded door behind her. "There are more of them in the stairwell. We need to find another way out." Marcus helped her to her feet, noticing that she had armed herself with a heavy-duty stapler and seemed remarkably composed despite the circumstances. "I'm Marcus Thompson, accounting. Listen, I know this building well. There's a service elevator near the loading dock that might still be operational. If we can reach it, we can get to the parking garage." Their planning was interrupted by a new voice, this one coming from the maintenance shaft above the drop ceiling. "Hey, down there. You folks need help?" A young man in work coveralls dropped down from the ceiling tiles, landing with surprising grace. He was maybe 25, with grease-stained hands and a tool belt that looked like it had seen serious use. "I'm Tommy, building maintenance. Been crawling through these ducts for the past 2 hours trying to stay ahead of those things." Tommy's knowledge of the building's infrastructure proved invaluable. He led them through a maze of service corridors and utility rooms that Marcus never knew existed, explaining in hushed tones how the building's ventilation system could be used to avoid the main hallways where the infected seemed to congregate. The maintenance worker had fashioned a weapon from a broken mop handle and a box cutter, and his confident movements suggested he'd already had several encounters with the infected. As they made their way through the building's hidden passages, Dr. Rodriguez shared what she'd observed about the infection. "Whatever this is, it spreads through bites, but it's not like anything I've seen in medical literature. The transformation happens quickly, maybe within an hour. The infected lose all higher brain function but retain basic motor skills and seem drawn to noise and movement." The service elevator was their beacon of hope, but reaching it required crossing the main lobby where dozens of infected office workers wandered aimlessly. Through the security office's monitors, they could see the chaos outside: overturned cars, abandoned emergency vehicles, and groups of people running from others who moved with that distinctive jerky gait of the infected. The city they'd known that morning had become an alien landscape where the most dangerous predators wore familiar faces. Tommy disabled the lobby's fire alarm system to prevent any accidental noise, while Marcus and Dr. Rodriguez prepared to make their dash to the elevator. The parking garage represented their best chance of escape, but they all knew that reaching it was only the beginning of their struggle. The world beyond the building's walls had become a place where the dead walked among the living, and survival would require more than just courage. It would demand every ounce of intelligence, resourcefulness, and determination they could muster. The service elevator shuddered to a halt at the parking garage level, its mechanical groaning echoing through the concrete chamber like a death knell. Marcus pressed his ear against the cold metal doors, listening for any signs of movement beyond. The garage, usually filled with the comfortable hum of fluorescent lighting and the occasional rumble of car engines, now sat in an unnatural silence that made his skin crawl. When the doors finally opened, the trio emerged into a dimly lit cavern where abandoned vehicles sat like metallic tombstones, their owners having fled in panic hours earlier. Tommy led them through the maze of cars with practiced efficiency, his maintenance keychain jingling softly as he guided them toward the garage's emergency exit. The sound seemed deafeningly loud in the oppressive quiet, and Marcus found himself wincing at every footstep. Dr. Rodriguez moved with surprising stealth for someone in dress shoes, her medical bag clutched tightly against her chest. They had made it halfway across the garage when the first infected emerged from behind a concrete pillar. A security guard Marcus recognized from the morning shift, his uniform torn and his face bearing the telltale signs of the infection. The guard's milky eyes fixed on them with predatory focus, and he began that distinctive shuffling approach that had become terrifyingly familiar. Marcus raised his improvised weapon, but Tommy was faster, swinging his modified mop handle with precision that spoke of recent practice. The impact sent the infected guard sprawling, but the noise attracted others. From the shadows between parked cars, more figures began to emerge. Office workers, delivery drivers, and visitors who had been trapped in the garage when the outbreak began. "The exit's blocked," Tommy whispered urgently, pointing toward the ramp where a cluster of infected had gathered around an overturned delivery truck. "We need another way out." Dr. Rodriguez spotted a maintenance door marked, "Authorized personnel only," and gestured toward it. The trio fought their way through the scattered infected, using the narrow spaces between cars to their advantage and avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. The maintenance door opened onto a tunnel system that connected the building to the subway station 2 blocks away. The underground passage was a lifeline Marcus never knew existed, but it came with its own dangers. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting dancing shadows that made every corner potentially hide a threat. The tunnel walls were slick with moisture, and their footsteps echoed in ways that made it impossible to determine if they were being followed. Emerging from the subway entrance felt like stepping onto an alien planet. The street that Marcus had walked down that very morning was now a battleground where humanity's veneer of civilization had been stripped away in a matter of hours. Abandoned cars blocked intersections, some still running with their doors hanging open where drivers had fled. Store windows were shattered, and the contents spilled onto sidewalks littered with personal belongings that people had dropped in their panic to escape. The military checkpoint at the intersection of 5th and Main had been overrun, its sandbags scattered and vehicles abandoned. Dr. Rodriguez knelt beside a fallen soldier, checking for signs of life, but shook her head grimly. Whatever organization they tried to maintain, it collapsed quickly, she observed, noting the evidence of rapid retreat rather than organized withdrawal. The implications were chilling. If the military couldn't contain the outbreak, what chance did civilians have? As they moved through the urban wasteland, they encountered pockets of survivors who had barricaded themselves in various buildings. Some called out desperately for help, while others remained hidden, watching the trio pass with suspicious eyes. The sound of gunfire echoed from several blocks away, followed by screams that suggested not all confrontations with the infected ended favorably for the living. Tommy's street knowledge proved invaluable as he guided them through alleyways and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where large groups of infected seemed to congregate. They witnessed scenes that would haunt them forever: a mother protecting her children from infected neighbors, a group of teenagers who had armed themselves with sporting goods, and elderly residents trapped in their apartments while infected figures clawed at their doors. The group's first major moral dilemma arose when they encountered the Patterson family barricaded in their corner store. Mr. Patterson, his wife, and their 2 young children had been trapped since the outbreak began, with infected customers still wandering the aisles. The family begged for help, but rescuing them would require exposing themselves to significant danger and might slow their progress toward finding a more secure shelter. Marcus found himself weighing the mathematics of survival against his basic humanity. Every decision carried life or death consequences, not just for his group but for other survivors they encountered. As darkness began to fall over the transformed city, the trio realized they needed to find shelter soon. The infected seemed more active after dark, and the temperature was dropping. They spotted an abandoned elementary school several blocks away, its brick walls and multiple exits offering potential security. The journey to reach it would test every survival skill they had learned in their brief but intense education in this new world where the dead walked among the living. The elementary school had seemed like salvation when they first barricaded themselves inside 3 days ago. The sturdy brick walls, multiple exits, and cafeteria supplies had provided a false sense of security that Marcus now realized was dangerously naive. They had rescued the Patterson family despite the risks, and the group had grown to include 2 other survivors they'd encountered along the way, an elderly librarian named Mrs. Chen and a college student named Jake who had been visiting his girlfriend when the outbreak began. Their fragile peace was shattered when Victor's people arrived. The sound of diesel engines and shouting voices had initially filled Marcus with hope. Organized survivors with vehicles and weapons seemed like the answer to their prayers. Victor Kane emerged from the lead truck like a military commander, his weathered face bearing the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His group of 23 survivors had taken over the school's gymnasium, establishing what he called a proper command structure, with himself as the unquestioned leader. Survival isn't about democracy, Victor announced during their first group meeting, his voice echoing off the gymnasium walls. It's about making hard decisions that keep the strong alive. The weak are a liability we can't afford. His followers nodded in agreement, their faces bearing the hardened expressions of people who had already made peace with moral compromises. They had food, weapons, and most importantly, a plan to reach a rumored safe zone in the mountains. Marcus felt uneasy about Victor's methods from the beginning, but it was Mrs. Chin who first voiced opposition. The elderly librarian, despite her frail appearance, possessed a sharp intellect and moral compass that refused to bend. When Victor announced that they would be leaving behind anyone who couldn't keep up during their planned departure, she stood up with surprising defiance. "We don't abandon people," she declared, her voice trembling but determined. "That's what separates us from the infected." The conflict escalated when Dr. Rodriguez made a horrifying discovery. While treating minor injuries in the school's nurse's office, she noticed that several of Victor's people were hiding bite marks under their clothing. When she confronted Victor privately, he dismissed her concerns with chilling pragmatism. "They're still functional," he said. "As long as they can fight, they stay with us. When they turn, we put them down. It's efficient resource management." The revelation that Victor was knowingly keeping infected individuals in their midst created a schism within the group. Marcus confronted Victor directly, demanding transparency about who was infected and when they planned to address the threat. Victor's response was swift and decisive. He had his people confiscate weapons from Marcus's original group and place them under what he euphemistically called protective supervision. Tommy, whose knowledge of the school's layout had proven invaluable, discovered that Victor's people had been planning to leave during the night, taking all the supplies and abandoning the dead weight, which included the Patterson children, Mrs. Chin, and anyone who questioned Victor's authority. The young maintenance worker crawled through the ventilation system to warn Marcus, whispering urgently through a bathroom ceiling tile. "They're loading the trucks now. We have maybe an hour before they discover we know." The escape required splitting up, something Marcus had hoped to avoid. Dr. Rodriguez created a distraction by triggering the school's fire alarm system, sending the infected in the surrounding area into a frenzy of activity that drew Victor's guards away from their posts. In the chaos, Marcus led Mrs. Chin and the Patterson family through the school's kitchen exit, while Tommy helped Jake and Dr. Rodriguez escape through the maintenance tunnels. The betrayal stung deeper than Marcus had expected. He had wanted to believe that humanity's better nature would prevail in the face of extinction, but Victor's group represented a different survival philosophy, one that prioritized strength over compassion and efficiency over ethics. As they fled through the school's playground, Marcus could hear Victor's voice over a bullhorn, calling them back and warning about the dangers of the outside world. The group reunited at a predetermined meeting point, a small church 6 blocks from the school. As they caught their breath in the sanctuary, Marcus realized that their experience with Victor had fundamentally changed them. They were no longer naive survivors hoping for rescue. They were refugees in a world where other humans might be as dangerous as the infected. The church's stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the floor, but the beauty felt hollow in their current reality. Dr. Rodriguez treated a minor injury Jake had sustained during their escape, while the Patterson children huddled close to their parents, their eyes wide with the understanding that the world had become a place where adults could no longer guarantee their safety. Mrs. Chin, despite her age and the trauma of recent events, began organizing their remaining supplies with methodical precision. Outside, the sounds of Victor's convoy faded into the distance, leaving them alone once again in a city where every shadow might hide a threat and every stranger might be either salvation or doom. The radio transmission had been their beacon of hope for 3 days. Static-filled but persistent, the automated message promised safety, medical care, and military protection at coordinates that corresponded to a research facility about 30 miles north of the city. "This is Emergency Broadcast Station 7. Safe zone established at Millbrook Research Complex. Military personnel on site. Medical facilities available. Proceed to coordinates 42.3601 north, 71.0589 west. Repeat, safe zone established." Marcus had been skeptical from the beginning, but the group's morale was deteriorating rapidly. Mrs. Chin had developed a persistent cough that Dr. Rodriguez couldn't treat with their limited supplies, and the Patterson children hadn't spoken in days, their eyes holding the hollow look of trauma that no child should bear. Even Tommy's usual optimism had faded as they moved from one temporary shelter to another, always staying ahead of the infected hordes but never finding true safety. The facility appeared legitimate from the outside, high chain-link fences topped with razor wire, military vehicles parked in organized rows, and guards in official-looking uniforms manning the entrance gate. The sign read Millbrook Biological Research Institute, in professional lettering, and the American flag flew at half-staff in a gesture that seemed both respectful and ominous. When they approached the main entrance, the guards processed them with military efficiency, asking detailed questions about their health, their journey, and any bites or scratches they might have sustained. "Welcome to Millbrook," said Dr. Harrison, a woman in her 50s wearing a pristine lab coat that seemed impossibly clean in their current world. "We're so glad you made it safely. You'll be quarantined for 48 hours as a precautionary measure, then integrated into our community. We have food, shelter, and most importantly, we're working on a solution to this crisis." The quarantine facility was a sterile dormitory with individual rooms that locked from the outside, a detail that Marcus found troubling but accepted as necessary security. Through the narrow window, he could see other parts of the complex, including what appeared to be a medical wing and several buildings that hummed with the sound of generators and equipment. The facility seemed to be thriving while the outside world crumbled. It was during their second night that Jake made the discovery that changed everything. The college student had always been curious, and his exploration of the ventilation system revealed that the facility extended far underground. Through the air vents, he could hear sounds that made his blood run cold, human screams mixed with inhuman growling, the mechanical noise of heavy machinery, and most disturbing of all, clinical discussions about test subjects and enhancement protocols. Dr. Rodriguez's medical knowledge helped them understand what they were witnessing when Jake led them through the maintenance tunnels to an observation window overlooking the lower levels. The facility wasn't just studying the infection, they were actively experimenting with it. In sterile laboratories below, scientists in hazmat suits worked with infected subjects that had been restrained on examination tables. Some of the creatures showed signs of surgical modification, while others had been injected with substances that seemed to increase their aggression and coordination. "They're not trying to cure this," Dr. Rodriguez whispered, her face pale with horror. "They're trying to weaponize it. Those aren't just infected down there, they're enhanced, made more dangerous." The implications were staggering. The facility wasn't a safe haven. It was a research installation that had been collecting survivors under false pretenses, using them as test subjects for experiments that defied every ethical standard of medical research. The truth became even more disturbing when they discovered that many of the guards were actually infected subjects that had been modified to retain enough cognitive function to follow basic commands while losing their humanity entirely. The facility's success in containing the outbreak wasn't due to superior defenses. It was because they had created a controlled environment where they could study and improve upon the infection. Their escape required careful planning and tremendous risk. Tommy's knowledge of building systems proved invaluable as he disabled the facility's security systems, while Dr. Rodriguez accessed the medical database to gather crucial information about the infection's origins and the experiments being conducted. The data revealed that the outbreak hadn't been accidental. It was the result of a bioweapons program that had lost containment, and facilities like Millbrook were part of a larger network attempting to regain control of their creation. The breakout coincided with a containment failure in the lower levels, as enhanced infected subjects broke free from their restraints and began attacking the facility's staff. In the chaos, Marcus led his group through the emergency exits while alarms blared and the complex's carefully maintained order dissolved into pandemonium. The irony wasn't lost on him that their escape was facilitated by the very monsters the facility had been creating. As they fled into the night, carrying stolen research data and the terrible knowledge of what they had witnessed, Marcus realized that their fight wasn't just against the infected. It was against the human architects of the apocalypse who saw the collapse of civilization as an opportunity for experimentation rather than a tragedy to be prevented. The stolen research data painted a grim picture of humanity's future. As Dr. Rodriguez studied the files on a laptop they had commandeered from the facility, her findings revealed that the infection was designed to be self-sustaining and ever-evolving. The documents mentioned other facilities scattered across the country, all working on different aspects of the bioweapons program, but they also contained a crucial piece of hope: references to a natural immunity that appeared in roughly 2% of the population, and coordinates for a legitimate research station in the Canadian Rockies where scientists were reportedly working on a cure. Marcus made the decision that would define the next phase of their survival. They would attempt the dangerous journey north to reach the mountain research station. The route would take them through increasingly hostile territory, where winter weather would be as deadly as the infected hordes, but staying in the populated areas meant certain death or worse, capture by facilities like Millbrook. The group had grown again during their escape from the research facility. They had rescued Dr. Sarah Kim, an epidemiologist who had been held captive for her knowledge of infectious diseases, and Marcus, a former army medic who had been captured while trying to expose the facility's true purpose. The addition of military experience and advanced medical knowledge strengthened their capabilities, but also meant more mouths to feed and more people to protect. Their journey began in the suburbs surrounding the research facility, where they scavenged supplies from abandoned homes and learned to move as a coordinated unit. Marcus had evolved from a cautious accountant into a natural leader, making tactical decisions that balanced risk with necessity. He established watches, rationed supplies, and most importantly, maintained the group's morale through increasingly difficult circumstances. The weather became their first major adversary as autumn temperatures dropped and early snow began to fall. Mrs. Chen's cough had worsened, and Dr. Rodriguez feared it might be pneumonia, a potentially fatal condition without proper antibiotics. The Patterson children, Emma and Michael, had adapted to their new reality with the resilience of youth, but the psychological toll was evident in their withdrawn behavior and night terrors. They encountered their first major survivor settlement at a fortified shopping mall, where a community of nearly 200 people had established a functioning society complete with governance, trade systems, and defensive strategies. The mall's leader, a former police chief named Captain Roberts, welcomed them cautiously but offered valuable intelligence about the route north. "The infected are evolving," he warned. "They're learning to hunt in packs, and some of them are showing problem-solving abilities we haven't seen before." The settlement offered them a choice: stay and contribute to their community's defense, or continue north with supplies and information about safe routes. Marcus struggled with the decision, knowing that the mall represented the first real security they had found, but the research data's urgency weighed heavily on his conscience. The potential cure in the Canadian facility could save millions of lives, but reaching it would require abandoning the safety they had found. The group split for the first time since their escape from the city. Mrs. Chin, whose illness had worsened, chose to remain at the mall with the Patterson family. The elderly librarian made the decision with characteristic grace, insisting that she would only slow them down and that the children needed stability more than adventure. The farewell was emotional, with promises to return once they had reached the northern facility. Continuing north with a smaller group, they faced new challenges as the infected began displaying the enhanced capabilities that Dr. Kim's research had predicted. The creatures were learning to use tools, coordinate attacks, and even set simple traps. During a harrowing encounter at an abandoned gas station, they witnessed infected working together to surround the building, demonstrating a level of tactical thinking that transformed them from mindless predators into cunning hunters. The group's dynamics shifted as relationships deepened under extreme stress. Dr. Rodriguez and Marcus developed a partnership based on mutual respect and shared leadership responsibilities, while Tommy's mechanical skills became increasingly valuable as they acquired and maintained vehicles for their journey. Jake, the college student, had matured rapidly, becoming the group's scout and proving surprisingly adept at reading the infected's behavioral patterns. Their most significant challenge came when they encountered other survivor groups that had turned to banditry and worse. A confrontation with raiders who had been preying on refugee convoys forced Marcus to make decisions about violence and justice that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. The encounter left them with additional supplies but also with the heavy knowledge that humanity's capacity for evil hadn't diminished in the face of extinction. As they pressed deeper into the northern wilderness, the infected became less numerous but more dangerous, adapted to the cold and displaying enhanced physical capabilities. The research facility's warnings about evolutionary acceleration were proving accurate, and the group realized they were racing against time not just to reach the Canadian station, but to arrive before the infection evolved beyond any possibility of cure or containment. The Canadian research station appeared through the swirling snow like a mirage of salvation. Perched on a rocky outcrop 300 feet above the valley floor, the facility's solar panels and wind turbines spoke of sustainable technology and long-term planning. After 6 weeks of brutal travel through increasingly hostile territory, the sight of electric lights and organized defenses filled Marcus with a hope he had almost forgotten how to feel. The facility was real, operational, and according to the radio communications they had intercepted, home to nearly 80 survivors including legitimate scientists working on a cure. Their relief was short-lived. As they approached the access road, Dr. Rodriguez spotted movement in the forest below, not the random wandering of scattered infected, but the coordinated advance of what appeared to be thousands of creatures moving with military precision. The enhanced infected that Dr. Kim had warned about had not only found the facility but had organized into a massive horde that was preparing for an assault that would determine the fate of one of humanity's last scientific strongholds. Dr. Sarah Kim's expertise proved invaluable as she analyzed the horde's behavior through binoculars borrowed from the facility's outer perimeter guards. "They're using the weather to their advantage," she observed grimly. "The cold is slowing down the less adapted infected, creating a natural selection process that's left only the strongest and most intelligent. This isn't a random attack, it's a calculated siege." The facility's commander, Colonel Martinez, was a career military officer whose experience in Afghanistan had prepared him for defending fixed positions, but nothing could have prepared him for an enemy that felt no fear, required no supply lines, and learned from each failed assault. His 43 personnel included 22 researchers, 14 security specialists, and 7 support staff. Against a horde estimated at over 3,000 enhanced infected, the mathematics of survival looked impossibly grim. Marcus found himself thrust into a leadership role he never wanted but couldn't refuse. His experience shepherding survivors through months of apocalyptic terrain had given him insights into the infected's behavior patterns that complemented the facility's scientific knowledge and military discipline. Together with Colonel Martinez and Dr. Elizabeth Brennan, the facility's lead researcher, he helped develop a defensive strategy that would either save the last hope for a cure or witness its destruction. The facility's advantages included elevated position, renewable power, sophisticated communications equipment, and most importantly, Dr. Brennan's research data indicating that they were within weeks of developing an airborne vaccine that could potentially reverse the infection in its early stages. Their disadvantages were overwhelming: limited ammunition, insufficient personnel, and an enemy that had evolved beyond their most pessimistic projections. The siege began at dawn on their second day at the facility. The enhanced infected demonstrated tactical sophistication that defied everything the survivors thought they knew about the creatures. They used the terrain to approach from multiple angles, employed crude tools to scale the facility's outer defenses, and most disturbing of all, sent expendable infected units to test the defenders' responses while the more intelligent specimens observed and adapted. Marcus coordinated the civilian defenders while Colonel Martinez managed the security team. Dr. Rodriguez established a field hospital in the facility's cafeteria, treating injuries with supplies that dwindled with each assault. Tommy's mechanical knowledge became crucial as he worked to maintain the facility's power systems and defensive mechanisms under increasingly desperate conditions. Jake, now a seasoned survivor at 19, proved invaluable as a sniper whose calm accuracy saved countless lives during the most intense moments of the siege. The turning point came when Dr. Kim made a breakthrough in understanding the infected's enhanced cognitive abilities. Her analysis of captured specimens revealed that the bioweapon's evolution had created a form of networked intelligence. The infected were sharing information through chemical signals, creating a collective consciousness that made them exponentially more dangerous but also potentially vulnerable to disruption. Working around the clock, Dr. Brennan and her team developed a chemical compound that could interfere with the infected's communication network. The plan required deploying the compound from the facility's emergency broadcast antenna, but reaching the transmission equipment meant crossing an area that was completely overrun by the most intelligent infected specimens. The mission to deploy the compound became a suicide run that Marcus led personally, taking Tommy and Jake along with 2 of Colonel Martinez's best soldiers. Fighting through corridors filled with infected that seemed to anticipate their every move, they reached the broadcast station as the facility's main defenses were on the verge of collapse. The successful deployment of the chemical disruption caused immediate chaos among the attacking horde, as the infected lost their coordination and began attacking each other in confusion. The victory was costly but decisive. The facility's survival meant that Dr. Brennan's cure research could continue, and the chemical weapon provided a new tool for fighting the enhanced infected. As the last of the confused creatures fled into the wilderness, Marcus stood among the exhausted survivors and realized that they had not just defended a building, they had preserved humanity's future. 6 months after the siege, the Mountain Research Facility had transformed from a desperate stronghold into the foundation of humanity's recovery. The chemical disruption weapon that had saved them during the final battle had been refined and distributed to other survivor communities across North America, breaking the enhanced infected's coordination and reducing them to manageable threats. Dr. Brennan's airborne vaccine had entered human trials with promising results, and for the first time since the outbreak began, people dared to speak of a future beyond mere survival. Marcus stood on the facility's observation deck, watching the morning sun illuminate the valley below where construction crews were building the first permanent settlement. The irony wasn't lost on him that the cautious accountant who had once worried about quarterly reports was now overseeing the reconstruction of civilization itself. His practical nature, which Sarah had once mocked as paranoid, had evolved into the methodical planning skills that made him invaluable in organizing humanity's comeback. The settlement in the valley housed nearly 400 survivors who had made the dangerous journey north following radio broadcasts about the cure research. Each new arrival brought stories of communities learning to fight back, of infected populations declining, and most importantly, of hope returning to a world that had almost given up. The social structure they were building balanced individual freedom with collective security, learning from both the failures of Victor's authoritarian approach and the vulnerability of unorganized groups. Dr. Rodriguez had established a medical college where she trained new healthcare providers using knowledge salvaged from the old world and hard-earned experience from the apocalypse. Her students included former teachers, mechanics, and even teenagers who had shown aptitude for healing. The curriculum covered everything from basic first aid to advanced surgical techniques, but also emphasized the psychological care that survivors needed to process their trauma and rebuild their humanity. Tommy had become the settlement's chief engineer, designing sustainable infrastructure that could withstand both harsh weather and potential future crises. His network of workshops trained young people in practical skills, metalworking, electronics repair, renewable energy systems, and the thousand small technologies that kept civilization functioning. The lessons learned during their journey had taught them that resilience came from self-sufficiency and the ability to adapt when complex systems failed. The communication network that Jake had helped establish connected dozens of survivor communities across the continent. His transformation from a frightened college student into a skilled coordinator of intercommunity relations represented the broader evolution of their generation. Young people who had lost their childhood to the apocalypse but gained wisdom and strength that would serve them for the rest of their lives. Dr. Kim's research had expanded beyond the original cure to explore ways of preventing future bioweapon disasters. Her work with international survivor communities via shortwave radio had revealed that the outbreak had been a global phenomenon, but also that humanity's response was becoming globally coordinated. The mountain facility served as a model for other research stations, sharing both scientific knowledge and organizational strategies that had proven successful. The memorial garden that Mrs. Chin had designed before her death during the previous winter honored both the victims of the outbreak and the heroes who had sacrificed themselves for others' survival. The elderly librarian had lived long enough to see the vaccine trials begin, passing away peacefully in her sleep with the knowledge that her journey had not been in vain. The Patterson family, who had relocated to the mountain settlement, tended the garden with their children, who were among the first generation to grow up in the post-outbreak world. Marcus often reflected on the transformation that had occurred not just in the world, but in himself and everyone who had survived. The apocalypse had stripped away the artificial complexities of modern life and revealed what truly mattered: community, compassion, and the determination to preserve something worth preserving. The skills that had seemed insignificant in the old world, practical preparation, situational awareness, the ability to work with others under stress, had become the foundation of the new one. The infected still existed in diminishing numbers throughout the world, but they were no longer an existential threat to humanity's survival. Advanced settlements had developed protocols for dealing with wandering creatures, and the chemical disruption weapons had broken their ability to mass coordinate. More importantly, the vaccine was showing success rates that suggested the infection could eventually be completely eliminated. As evening approached and the settlement's lights began to twinkle in the valley below, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since before the outbreak began: genuine optimism about the future. They had not just survived the end of the world, they had built something better from its ashes. The new communities were more resilient, more egalitarian, and more prepared for crisis than the civilization they had replaced. The dead no longer walked among them in the same numbers, but the living had learned to walk with purpose, carrying forward the memory of those they had lost and the responsibility to ensure that humanity's second chance would not be wasted. The world had ended, but life had found a way to begin again.